Okay, guys, we are back here for part two of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, from 600 to 1450. And today we're going to focus on East Africa, get into their trade, as well as some of the general cultural things we saw in kind of all of Africa at this time. Now, aside from kingdoms, you also have the development of city-states. And these city-states, in many ways, are going to be very similar to the Italian city-states that we're going to talk about during the Renaissance, except, oh, wait, these guys were like 800 years older, again, during the time period of the Dark Ages. Well, down in East Africa, it was not so dark. You had the development of these Swahili city-states like Mogadishu and Kilwa and Mozambique and Malindi, which are some of the main ones, plus you see some of the other ones on the map on your right. These were mostly Muslim, which is why they were able to lock in with the trade, but these cities were just incredible, and they controlled area and land and trade, and they just made like a boatload of money. These city-states were ruled by kings and were incredibly well-planned cities. We had the development of multi-story buildings, use of stonework, kind of grid patterns. They used forts to protect their harbors. They really were just outstanding. And the goods that they sold, a lot of gold, tortoiseshell. If you look on the right, you see a tortoiseshell mask, and you actually see this box here made of tortoiseshell. This was really high-end stuff. I know we don't think of tortoiseshell as really impressive, but it was rare in most of the world at that time, and rare means expensive. And so tortoiseshell was able to bring a lot of money. And then you also had glass making, something the Romans could never do, along with textiles and other clothing goods or goods to make clothing. And the Swahili city-states really fostered and expanded trade quite a bit. And as we can see how powerful they were, I mean, look at this. This is a fort structure outside of ancient Mombasa. I mean, good luck getting from the ocean up that with guys with arrows and different types of things firing down at you. No way. Here is ancient Kilwa. On the right, you see what's left of a mosque. On the left, again, another fort. I mean, this is again super impressive type of stuff. But we also had some kingdoms in East Africa too, the most notable which was of Zimbabwe. I wish I could tell you a lot about it. We don't have any writings, and Zimbabwe fell, don't know how, a long time ago. We think they were kind of operational between the year 1000 and 1300. They did expand. We know they had massive amounts of trade, particularly in ivory and, oh, once again, gold. We have discovered some incredible cities, the most notable being Great Zimbabwe. And I wish I could tell you more, I just don't know. But to give you an idea of how impressive it was, the Europeans refused to believe that actually native Africans could have built something because of, again, their racist attitudes that we'll get to later. But it shows how blown away they were by when they found the city. And if you look here, Great Zimbabwe, you look at this huge stonework, the aerial shot from above, and then over here, this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But you can't do this as some like fly-by-night empire. You're talking about high-end engineering, clear mathematical skills. And so in East Africa, you had a lot going on, just like Ghana and Mali and things like that. And what made it that way was trade. If you look at the trade routes that existed, here you have the Saharan trade routes, which I'll talk about more in a minute. Here, of course, are your city-states reaching all the way over to China, and we absolutely have found Chinese goods in here, and we'll see in the future there were some Chinese sailors, the most notable Zheng He, that actually sailed to Africa. So unlike with some of the Silk Roads, if you look the roads up here where people didn't necessarily travel the whole route, here you actually had people becoming world travelers. And they were able to do it for a couple different reasons. One, and most importantly, was the domestication of the camel. The camel is crucial in Africa. They can carry heavy loads. They don't need tons of water. It allows people to live in Africa, and those trade routes with the gold and the salt and slaves will really get going. You also have lots of new crops that come in, things like cotton and Asian rice and citrus, but the most important will be sugarcane. And with sugarcane, This stuff is incredible, and sugarcane can be used to create sugar. It can be used to create other sweeteners. It is used to create rum. And to give you an idea of how powerful it is, I mean, crystallized sugar is actually seen to be just as addictive as many illegal drugs that you know. And when the Europeans got their first taste of this stuff, they went crazy for it, for that, and for rum. Eventually, Africans will set up some plantations in the northern part of the continent near the Mediterranean Sea, and eventually sugarcane will make its way into the Caribbean, which of course the sugarcane would play a huge role in the development of the slave trade later on. Now, you also had some changes in culture, and a lot of it, because of this trade, had to do with religion. Now, native African religions, I'm not going to go into all of them, but the interesting thing you need to understand of them is most of them were monotheistic. Everybody always wants to say that in Christianity and Judaism, that they were the only, and Islam are the only monotheistic religions in the world, and they're not. In ancient Africa, traditionally, most of these societies believed in one creator type God. They had a deep belief in spirits that could impact you, and some could be good and some could be bad. They had a belief in the soul. They had lots of priests, or you see this guy here, or guys that were often known as shamans. And religion was crucial to really every tribal group that we know. There is some type of religion, and religion is very impactful. Now, as a result, monotheistic religions would have a lot of success, and it was Islam that would get there first. Well, technically, Christianity got to Axum first, but everywhere else in Africa, it was Islam. And if you see on the map on the right, I mean, look at this. More than 50% of the people are Islamic, all in northern Africa, as well as down the coast. These are those Somali city-states that we just talked about a little while ago, the Swahilis in modern day Somalia, all the way down here, and then 15 to 50% Islamic. And actually, the rest of this area that's in gray, the vast majority of those people are Christian. And the idea, because of the belief in the monotheistic religion, you got Islam coming in, and it was very interesting because it was very blended. Islam wasn't necessarily like it was in Arabic nations and the Turkic nations. You don't really have Sharia law. Women don't veil themselves. They do go after belief in witches and things along that line, but Islam was used by the leaders to help unify their people. So once again, you see Islam as having a unifying power within Africa. Now, for those that wouldn't convert, would there be some problems? Yes, there would, and we'll talk about those in the future, but quite a big change in Africa. Now, gender roles in Africa were actually also very interesting in that you did have certain levels of equality, but you had specific things that men and women did. Men were herders, craftsmen, they were tanners, tanners in the words of uh, leather workers. They were good at clearing land as well as hunters. Women, on the other hand, did lots of crafts. They were planters. Some were even advisors in local tribal governments, and some were merchants. Most of them worked together. Now, all leadership positions were male, and women were still expected to be subservient to men, but they had a lot of activity, if you will. They were involved in day-to-day life as well. Because everybody was really involved in farming, because we said because of the lack of resources, you have a lot of people working together. But what trumped all of them was actually age. The older you are, the more respect and power that you have. And most, even of these kingdoms, you did have a king of the kingdom, but you still had the local tribal groups. And the tribal groups still looked to their chief elders and their chiefs for leadership. And the chiefs had to be of a certain age. And so it was really interesting. And I think what's interesting here, here's a piece of African art from this particular time period. You see a male and a female. And notice how they're equal. The male actually has his hand around the female, but they are sitting, they are the same height, they are sitting in the same way. And that can, really conceptualize your look at women and how they were treated there. Now, unfortunately, at this time, you also get the start of slavery, and this is kind of the big negative here. Around the 900s, you start to see slavery get developed, and you can see here in the Middle Ages, you had all of these routes which were regular trade, but also the way um, for the slave trade as well. Um, who are the slaves? In many cases, they were prisoners of war and things like that, but eventually you start getting slavers that actually go out and capture people. The Europeans are really going to take advantage of this, and we need to understand that slavery did exist before, and it really had a tremendous impact on Africa long term. Now, this isn't the chattel slavery, they're not necessarily seen as property, but nonetheless, this was really the start of slavery way back in the 900s. And when the Europeans arrived, when they were looking on slaves, they were just able to expand what was there, but take it in a different direction. All right, but we see very dynamic. So let's get our comments, let's get our questions, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.